Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EA Zoom meeting for Archetypes in the News for May 2nd, 2019. It's really wonderful to be back with everyone, and I hope we can get into some good discussion here later, and if not, on the Facebook chat afterwards. And I'd like to just first start by thanking Linda for all that she does for the astrological community and the EA Zoom community, and bringing new astrologers into the fold all the time. It's a really wonderful gift she's giving to the community. So thank you, Linda. And today we're going to look at the Mueller report and the archetypal astrological signatures surrounding it, and Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and her reaction to the mass shooting in Christchurch in March. And Greta Thunberg, who is a climate activist from Sweden, and she's started a protest from, it's called Climate Strike, or School Strike for the Climate. And it's picking up a lot of momentum around the world. And we'll finish off with Alex Honnold, and he's a free climber. He ascends mountains with no ropes, and it's he ascended El Capitan in Yosemite, which is one of the most difficult climbs in the world. So I think it should be a really interesting hour, so let's take a look. So just to kind of review some of the work I've been working with in the Archetypes in the News series, surrounds, of course, Donald Trump and his election, and all of the political turmoil that has ensued from his election. And just to briefly go over his natal chart, Rick Tarnas pointed out in one of the first analysis I saw on Donald Trump how Pluto was at the exact midpoint of Mars and Saturn in his natal chart. So the midpoint is 10 degrees and 14 minutes of Leo. So it's just 10, 12 minutes off of Pluto in his chart. So he's born with Mars rising, and because Pluto is at the midpoint of Mars and Saturn, it draws all of them together, and so you get kind of a Mars, Saturn, Pluto triple conjunction type energy. And this is the part of him that has that like ruthless Pluto and intensity Pluto to fight back, fight Mars, and the resistance is Saturn. And there's you also see this in Roy Cohn's chart, who he learned these tactics from in the 70s, and many other like boxers and people who like to fight have Mars, Saturn, Mars, Pluto, and many arrangements, different types of arrangements. And he also was born with Mercury square to Neptune, and this seems to be a big part of his the stream and flow of consciousness. Mercury's the mind, Neptune the stream and flow of consciousness, and his challenge that he has there with perceiving the truth, speaking the truth, not being kind of caught up in his own imagination. Neptune the imagination, and words with Mercury, and his speaking often is what he believes. It's his own ideas of reality, and he tends to double down on them within any sentence or conversation that might not be true at the beginning. So it's a really interesting combination. And Mercury Neptune can be highly poetic and highly intuitive. It doesn't have to come through and challenge in these really difficult ways, but this seems to be the way it's manifesting in his experience. So he's also born with the Sun-Uranus conjunction, which is the genius quality of his insightfulness in many ways, but it's also his erraticness and all over the place. Can't pin him down. It's an unexpected experience. It's unexpected manifestation of his psyche. It's constantly keeping us on our toes because you don't know what to expect. It's unprecedented. It's unhinged. And it's trined by Jupiter, so Jupiter gives it this support, this, it's a big part of his arrogance and sense of superiority, because Jupiter inflates and magnifies, so it's magnifying this sense of self, this sense of identity. And with Uranus, it's like Jupiter-Uranus that tends towards like good fortune and good luck. It's a gambler's aspect, which he's constantly throughout his life, just gambling over and over again. And there's several other things we could talk about. The Venus-Saturn conjunction, constantly seeing things through the eyes of critical judgment of like others and their status, like marrying for status or for beauty, or like he's the judge, Saturn of beauty, Miss America contest, that type of thing. So there's lots of different ways that this comes through, but primarily we see him in a very reactionary, defensive Saturn-Mars energy where he's constantly reacting, giving us his Mars energy in a reactionary way. It's also trine to the moon. It's this, it's really easy for him to attack other people, that type of thing. So this is really important, I think, just for the overall collective zeitgeist of what's taking place. This is the Great American Eclipse, happened in August 21st, 2017. And Dale O'Brien pointed out that it started in Lincoln City, Oregon, here in Oregon, and it passed over Lincoln, Nebraska, and it finished here crossing Fort Sumter, South Carolina, which is where the Civil War began. And this was just, I think, 8 or 10 days after the Charlottesville incident. And you can really see, I believe, what's happening is there's a sanctioning by Trump of white supremacist ideology, and it's erupting. The eclipse is revealing the shadow of the racist history of the United States. And I think it's more than that, too. It's revealing, it seems, or putting into prominence like the United States history of political manipulation. And in some ways, like when the situation with Saudi Arabia and bin Salman murdered Jamal Khashoggi, in many ways, the United States in the past, we probably would have handled that would have been okay with us, but we wouldn't have said so up front. It would have been something that we kept in the shadows because we didn't want to just reveal the fact that we're a transactional type nation. And what's really important is the overall political situation with our countries versus like the human rights of one individual. And in the past, we would at least save face and give face to, human rights, that type of thing. But it seems like now it's just kind of out in the open. Like Trump doesn't hide it. It's revealing a large part of this part of America's shadow. I mean, we were attacked in the 2016 election, but the United States is involved in over 80 different episodes of either interfering with other countries' elections or straight out coups and overthrowing of their governments. So the United States has really guilty fingerprints on the rest of the world's political activities. And so in large measure, it seems as though this is kind of a blowback, the 2016 Russian interference. And I'm not trying to sanction one is correct versus another. It's just the archetypes seem to be pointing towards, showing us or revealing, constellating or revealing a large part of what's taking place. So this is Trump's transits for the eclipse. The eclipse took place at 28 Leo, and it was conjoining Mars, and it was conjoining his natal Mars. And you can really, kind of see this as like it was revealing that part of him, sanctioning it in a way, and he has sanctioned the violent kind of rhetoric and around, political rhetoric in general. And in particular, what seems to be kind of really important in Donald Trump's natal chart is just the fact that this Saturn-Pluto energy is so intensified by the midpoint alignment and with Mars that one of the more important qualities that manifest in Saturn-Pluto is the tendency for psychological splitting and the tendency for othering. So the splitting comes from Saturn and the boundaries are Saturn, and Pluto is often what we're repressing and what we fear as being perceived as evil. But when Saturn and Pluto come into alignment, or it's in a natal chart and we're caught in its complex, we tend to fortify, intensify Pluto, the Saturnian boundaries that get rigidly constellated, and then to project evil onto what's outside the boundaries and project the good on the inside. So all the good is on the inside of the boundaries to be protected, to be saved, and then outside needs to be destroyed in order for what's on the inside to continue to manifest. And what we can see is that the other major instance that happened in Trump's presidency so far, I mean, there's been many, but I think history will look back as like Charlottesville and the Helsinki issue, where he basically, I mean, I'll say he committed traitorous acts. He, on foreign soil with Putin, saying that he believed Putin, that they didn't, interfere in our elections against all of the evidence that our own intelligence agencies are saying. And interesting, this was a day before the other eclipse, just a year after Charlottesville, and it was conjoining Trump's natal Saturn. And it seemed to be revealing in this instance the shadow dimension of his lack of integrity, the lack of being able to trust him, the lack of being able to believe in his sense of truth. And Pluto is intensifying this process. This is a big transit. We'll talk about it more later. And then Saturn was opposing his Mercury, which you often see with mistake decisions that are consequences, or decisions that have long-lasting consequences, that type of thing. And I think what's really helpful to maybe look at here is the Saturn-Pluto cycle that we are all now entering into. The conjunction from 2017, 2018 through 2021. And if we go back in the 20th century, we'll start in 1882, this is the first Immigration Act of the United States. You see the borders intensification and the othering against Chinese immigration at this time. And then the next conjunction was 1914 in World War I, the boundaries that were put up around the world and the divisiveness and the intense contractional energy. Pluto intensifies, Saturn is the contractional energy. And I guess I should mention, most of this is pulled from Cosmos and Psyche. There's a few that aren't, but Cosmos and Psyche really goes through these alignments, and it's extremely helpful for contextualizing our moment in history and what the whole world is kind of going through at this time. So we can see the white ones are the conjunctions. This is a cycle. So the conjunction 1914, and then the Great Depression happened during the opposition. World War II began exactly at the waning square. And then the next conjunction happened just after World War II was over, and it sanctioned, or it marked the beginning of the Cold War, the founding of Israel and Pakistan. And the next opposition was the Vietnam War, the Six-Day War in Israel, and then the next waning square was the Watergate crisis and the OPEC oil embargo that took place. So you can see these themes of like crisis, contraction in history. There's a conservative pullback. You can see economic downturns or contractions of the economy would take place. And then the next conjunction in 1982 was kind of, it was when Reagan got elected, and it was kind of the peak and the beginning of the end of the Cold War. Like it was kind of where it ramped up, and then glasnost happened, and by 1986, there were stark treaties and nuclear disarmament was taking place, and the wall fell down in 89. So, but what's interesting is this is also the first suicide bombing against the West by fundamentalist Islam. It took place in Lebanon. It was actually Shia, Syria-inspired and Iranian-inspired, but it was quickly adopted by the Sunni Muslims, and that became more of the war against the West was against Sunni Muslims, which were responsible for the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993 and 9/11, obviously, and most of what we're dealing with in the Middle East and Syria and Saudi Arabia and parts of Iraq. So what's interesting about another interesting fact that we'll look at here in a minute is, along with the bombings at the beginning of the Cold War, was it was the New Zealand Arms Act. So like what took place just now in New Zealand, the last time they had a major arms act was during the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And how you can see that correlating is, excuse me, how you can see that correlating is Saturn is the law, the restriction, the repression, and Pluto is the violence, the arms. So you get a tendency to restrict or put in more conservative restrictions against plutonic weapons. So that happened in 83, and the first World Trade Center bombing in 93. And then this was also when the Rwandan genocide took place, where the Tutsis and Hutus, they're intermarried in many ways. I mean, they've been living together for centuries, for decades, I'm not sure. But all of a sudden in 92, 93, 94, there was a wave. It swept the nation, and they killed each other by machete. It was like an othering that took place right within a single society. And it just demonstrates how the Saturn-Pluto energy can come in at any time. And it seems as though we're participating in the complexes. We are, why more people are okay with the wall at the Mexican border and separating families and that type of thing here. So it seems to be something, an archetypal complex that's forged that we all move into and participate in. And so the last one we just went through, the last cycle, was the 2008 through 2012 period, which is the major financial recession and the Syrian civil war. And now what's taking place is there's a real conservative consolidation of power around the world. Brazil, Israel just aligned with one of their most right-wing parties in order to get elected, to be Netanyahu elected. And in Poland and Hungary, the immigration crisis around the world. And here in the United States, it seems we're very possibly going into a constitutional crisis, depending on how Trump negotiates the situation. But it'll be a fallback to the Watergate period, which there are several really intriguing correlations with that. But to move on to the Mueller report, which is clearly one of the most important political documents of our time. It happened to be released during this 2-month-long Mercury-Neptune conjunction and retrograde period, which is an extremely long version of that. Mercury went all the way to 29 Pisces, stationed retrograde, and went back to 16 and stationed. So this is nearing the end of the retrograde period. And the Mueller report comes out, and what does it seem to be surrounding its release is the confusion, the lack of clarity, the ambiguity as to what's real, as to what it actually says, as to what the spin was put on it, and to the way that Trump ran with it and what he said about it versus what Democrats and other people are interpreting the same information with. It's very ambiguous. It's very almost delusional in places, I would say. But there's a tremendous lack of clarity about what is actually happening. And it seems as though there may be a way in which it's getting buried in the Saturn-Pluto energy. It's getting repressed and buried by the authorities, by the powers that be. But we'll see. It's still up in the air. So this is Robert Mueller's chart on the inside, and he has born with Mercury and Mars in a tight conjunction, which you often see with really inspired minds, debaters, people who are sharp with their mental activity, with their writing. There's often a real clarity and conciseness, or the capacity to take action, to be quick with one's mind, with one's writing. And what's interesting is that the Mercury-Neptune conjunction is opposing his natal Mars-Mercury. And just the Mercury-Neptune, you see there's the same thing, the ambiguity about his decisions. Many people are criticizing him for not making a decision. I think that's probably off, but because it seems like if he had made a decision, that would have handcuffed the Democrats into having to impeach him. But I think he left it open so that it would be an option for the Senate and Congress, as it should be, to whether to impeach or not. And I'll just mention that that's the way Watergate happened, and it's also the way the Ken Starr investigation, they didn't actually indict. Ken Starr didn't indict the president for obstruction. He just said this is possible, and then the Congress did it. Same thing happened with Watergate. Jaworski was the lawyer, and he said he didn't indict him, but he gave the evidence to Congress, and then they went through impeachment. So it seems as though that's what Mueller was trying to do, but Barr intercepted it and said, nope, no obstruction, it's okay. So this is the letter. If you didn't know, Robert Mueller just wrote a letter to Bill Barr. I mean, actually, it was given to him 3 days after the initial release of Barr's letter on the 27th of March, but we didn't find out about it until yesterday. So this is Robert Mueller to Barr in that letter. He says, the summary letter that the Department of Justice, sent to Congress and released to the public late in the afternoon of March 24th did not fully capture the context, nature, and substance of this office's work and conclusions. There is now public confusion, Mercury, Neptune, about the critical aspects of the results of our investigation. This threatens to undermine a central purpose for which the department appointed the special counsel, to assure full public confidence in the outcome of the investigations. So it seems like this is actually, like Mueller is saying, it's undermining the whole principle for why the special counsel even existed, was to ensure public confidence. And now Mueller has stepped in and destroyed that in many ways, unless we can get Mueller to testify and get more of the truth out. But there's so much about momentum and what the public believes already. The impulse for impeaching Trump has dropped in the polls like by 10%, from like 60 to 56%, or 66% to 56%. So what Barr did is working. I'll just mention this really quickly. It's also true that Fox News called the 2000 election for George W. Bush prior to it actually being solidified. And a lot of people think that it was because Fox News called it for Bush prior to calling it for Gore that the majority of the nation thought Bush had won. And then the Supreme Court ruled for Bush, in part because the momentum of the country was moving in that direction already. It would have been too much more of a challenge to shift to Gore. I don't know how much of all that was really played in, but really interesting how, the narrative is crucial, and how what people believe, even for a short period of time, and then trying to change back to other ways of perceiving what took place is a really challenging shift. So, yeah, we'll see. Very challenging situation, it seems. So this is William Barr's chart. He was at first job in Washington was CIA, and he suggested pardons for Caspar Weinberger during the Iran-Contra investigation, which many people believe he shut down that investigation by doing that. And Barr is a strong defender of presidential power and wrote advisory opinions justifying the United States invasion of Panama and the arrest of Manuel Noriega, and the controversial opinion that the FBI could enter into foreign soil without the consent of the host government to apprehend fugitives wanted by the United States government for terrorism and drug trafficking. So, like, he's always been a strong conservative law imperialist in that sense, and isn't concerned about general just practices of fairness. It seems more on that right-wing conservative. I mean, he seems like a janitor, honestly, like a cleanup man, someone who comes in and takes care of the mess once the things have gotten too out of hand. But here's Barr's transits. He had the Mercury-Neptune conjunction was opposite his natal Saturn, and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is trine his natal Mercury. It seems kind of that this is kind of helping him to bury the secrets. I mean, my guess is that the redactions in the report are actually pretty damning, and potentially damning on conspiracy. And that's really why they're holding it back and they don't want to release the unredacted report, is because it actually is more damning on conspiracy, which is why they were saying no obstruction, because there was no conspiracy. It's all such a ruse. But anyway, this is something important, I think, that what led up to the 2016 election, and this is the actual day of the Brexit vote, which happened during a Mercury, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter grand cross. So Mercury, Neptune is the confusion around the decision that was made. And then Neptune, Saturn, it corresponds to the deceptive Saturn image campaign. So image is Neptune, the imagination, but also we perceive things, and Saturn is potentially deceptive. And the same thing happened during the 2004 election with John Kerry and George W. Bush, was that there was a swift vote campaign to undermine John Kerry, and it was fake. It was a false. It was fake news, and it's a propaganda campaign. And that's when it swift boated Kerry, and that was one of the first Saturn-Neptune misinformation campaigns in the 20th century. And Brexit and the Cambridge Analytica situation, that was the same thing, which is also a big part of what led to Trump being elected here, was the Facebook ads and all that from the Russian government. So like that misinformation, you see that a lot with Saturn Neptune, and that's what Barr had. The Mercury Neptune is opposite as Saturn, so that same like deceptive misinformation campaign to bury the actual truth. And here is Trump's transits for the Mueller report, which is really interesting. He has the Saturn-Pluto opposite his natal Saturn, which I think, this is a much longer transit, runs through 2021. I'm hopeful that it will be the most dominant force in his life over the next few years, but it makes a lot of sense that when the Mueller report was released, Jupiter was stationing in opposition to his sun, conjoining his moon, and he was exonerated, right? The Jupiterian success, the birth, he felt as though he was empowered to be free and to go and do whatever he wanted. He actually was probably inflated and overzealous in a Jupiterian way, because he immediately tried to take on healthcare and like say the Republicans were going to be the healthcare party, and it just fell apart. It was a complete disaster, but it happened really quickly. But he's taken those types of acts, like more confidence in his assent or assertion of his policies. So what's going to take place is that, this will last for the next 9 months or so. Jupiter will come back to like 14 and station opposite is Uranus, and then back across here. But the Saturn-Pluto conjunction we have for the next 3 years, through 2021, and it's going to oppose his natal Saturn throughout this time. And it seems as though this is the part of, Saturn being integrity, and like how constitutionally grounded and solid is our integrity. And it's hard for me to see with someone as pathologically lying as Trump is, and lied his way to the top, lied his way to the presidency, to be able to withstand this transit and not be held to account by government, political, societal forces. So what's interesting is this is his chart for inauguration day of 2021. So just after the 2020 election, and he'll either be ascending to his second term, or he will be moving into the private sector again. And what's interesting is it could go either way. Jupiter opposite Pluto, that's definitely an empowering transit, right? When he was first elected, Pluto was square to his natal Jupiter, and Jupiter was conjoining, moving into a conjunction. So you had Jupiter, Pluto, that empowerment, ascent to power, very much a part of his initial election. But here, it could be that Jupiter ascending to the second term of power, or he also has double Saturn-Pluto. So Saturn opposite Pluto and Pluto opposite Saturn. So like double any transit tends to reinforce that transit in more weight and intensity, and particularly Saturn and Pluto, the most weighty, the most difficult potentially transits, calling one out on one's corruption, all those things, meeting the hard truth of reality. We'll see. I don't have any predictions, but I do understand as though many of the potential charges that have been laid down they've laid them down in a way as to potentially actually indict him in criminal court the day he leaves office, rather than because they know they can't really indict him while he's a sitting president. Okay, so we'll see. That's all up in the air. And there's many different possibilities. Maybe I will stop right there for a split second and see if you guys have any questions. So anyone have any questions? No? Okay. Oh. Hi, Carolina. So what we'll do now is move on to Jacinda Ardern. And okay, Jacinda Ardern is the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And I imagine Linda and you guys know a bit more about her than I do. So anything you want to add, please do. And what I noticed right off the bat is that she has a similar alignment or configuration as to Trump, in that Mars is just 2 degrees off her midpoint between Saturn and Pluto. So like, rather than it coming through in this like intense, malicious type of attacking energy, she seems to be more of the like just a fortified constitution, since Saturn Pluto in a positive way, with like the courage to take action and to be decisive about what one's intense beliefs are, or the way one feels strongly about the law, or taking a stand, all Saturn things. And she's also born with Mercury and a tight square to that, which Pluto intensifies the mind, the mental capacities, capacity for speech and empowering one's voice and capacity for speech. And she's also born with Moon trine Jupiter. So Moon trine Jupiter. It's a noon chart. The moon could be 7 degrees on either side, but at noon it's exactly trine to Jupiter. So she's born with Moon trine Jupiter at any point in the day. And she's the youngest female head of government in the world, and she's the second woman to give birth as the head of state. And she's also really focused on ending child poverty. So all these really seem to fit Moon Jupiter and Mercury Pluto Saturn, and intensity for capacity for moral discernment and action. Like Mars Pluto people tend to be people who have a lot of energy and can aren't afraid to put themselves out there, to have that courage to ascend. So this is the chart for when she first took office. It was August 1st, 2017. And there's a couple of things. Jupiter was in a conjunction with her natal Pluto, like I mentioned with Trump, his ascent to power. You see it often when people kind of take that mantle of being in the world. And it was square to her natal Mercury. And the other thing is that Uranus was beginning to square her natal Sun position. So Uranus liberating, emancipating, awakening, bringing to the fore, showing to the world in many ways. And at her first press conference, when she was elected in August, she stated the forthcoming campaign would be one of relentless positivity. So what does that sound like? Relentless is Pluto. Jupiter is positivity. And her, she's speaking it. So it's like the next, and also it's right around this time Mercury would have been conjoining her natal Jupiter. So she had double Jupiter-Mercury alignments. And it's also true that in the month of August, the Labor Party doubled their poll numbers right when she came into power. And the party was inundated with donations reaching $700 per minute at its peak. And there was lots of election coverage by commentators referring to the Jacinda effect or Jacinda mania. So that really fits the Uranus square Sun, this kind of like extraordinary awakening or enlightenment or excitement that's brought to one's solar identity, the way one shines in the world. So this was the last major arms gun regulation that took place in New Zealand in 1983 during the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And this is the chart for the Christchurch mass shooting, which is clearly a Saturn-Pluto event. The white supremacy is a Saturn-Pluto phenomenon. The KKK was actually founded during a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, I believe, of 1866. And it's interesting, Mars in the trine to that. So the white supremacy, it comes from, like I was saying before, the psychological splitting, the boundaries, the good's on the inside, the evil's on the outside, and it must be destroyed violently with Mars. The mass shooting here in the United States, most recently, that's largest mass shooting here, is also took place during a Mars trine Pluto event or period. And you see it like with, it has like a precision, the trine, but then the Mars and Pluto have like an intense directional focus, which tends to orient towards precision, especially like sniper-like precision. You see it often with snipers and with murderers. But these are her transits for the event. And what I was struck by when I first saw her speech on March 20th of just 5 days after the massacre, she and her government decided to ban all the weapons that were used during the event. And they did it by 3 o'clock that afternoon. It was like an immediate shutdown. So what was happening in the sky? The Saturn-Pluto conjunction was opposite her natal Mercury and square to her natal Pluto. So she's getting Saturn square Pluto during the middle of a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and it's opposite her natal Mercury. So like Saturn opposite Mercury is the no, it's the shutting down, it's the law coming in to make regulations to repress the plutonic violent war weapons. And look on the other side, there's a Sun Mercury conjunction exactly opposite her natal Saturn. She has double Saturn Mercury, and there was no hesitation. It was like 5 days later, we're going to do this, and we're not going to even wait till the end of the day. We're going to stop this right now. You can no longer purchase these weapons as of now. I mean, it's been praised around the world by gun control activists or advocates, and it's as a model as to what can be done if the political will is behind the decisions. So I'm really impressed. I would recommend anyone to watch the speech that she gave. I mean, even the way that she says it has like a Mercury Saturn precision, like a foundational like confidence of being, an intensity of focus, and a clear like no, like this is going to end and we're going to stop it now. I mean, it's very inspiring. Yeah, I think it's just a great speech. So now we'll take a look. Or does anyone have anything to add or any questions about that? Okay. All right. So now we're going to take a look at, this is Greta Thunberg, and she's a Swedish child. She's only 16 years old, and it's a really fascinating story. Oops. Okay, so all right. So she's born in January 3rd of 2003 during this Jupiter-Uranus opposition and Jupiter-Neptune opposition, kind of right in the middle. So she has Jupiter opposite both Neptune and Uranus, and it's in a T-square with Mars and Venus. So she's a Mars-Uranus, Mars-Jupiter person, and she's born with Saturn in the opposition with Pluto. And she's also born with a Sun-Chiron conjunction. This is a noon chart. I don't have the time, but a couple things, like as an activist, as a rebel kind of protester, you often see that with Mars and Uranus. People who are risk takers, who have an intense courage to rebel, to protest, to break free of tradition. And with Jupiter, it expands that. You see like a conquistador type energy, the the will, Mars, to ascend to the highest level or to take on big projects and go for it, to conquer the highest goal that one feels. It's got like a robust energy to, both handle things and to take action, whatever one is desire and focus are interested in. So it's very interesting. Greta first heard, she gave a TED talk, and she described in that how she first heard about climate change at the age of 8. So this is a chart for that year in June, and that whole year, roughly, Saturn was in a square to her sun. And this is the beginning of the Great Recession that we went through, 2008 through 2012. And so it's a T-square between Saturn and Pluto and Uranus in the sky. And she is experiencing that with like a central focus because her sun's at 12 Capricorn. It's right on the axis of the T-square. So during this whole period, I mean, she learns about climate change, and she doesn't understand why people aren't taking action. It's like, wait, this is a giant problem, and yet no one is doing anything about it. It was just like, I think she's had it like a dissonance experience. She couldn't understand why that was happening that way. And she fell into a depression at age 11 when Pluto was really tightly conjoining her sun. Saturn on her Mars, potentially. This is harder to dial in, but then Uranus, it's the Uranus-Pluto square is happening, and Uranus is, wanting to awaken the sun, but Pluto is saying, wait, this is really serious, and there's a, depth, and in a sense, it's like she went into, she stopped talking and eating and went into like a cocoon or a process stage where like she went inward and stopped speaking, stopped eating, and it was kind of a death rebirth process. It seems it's like going into the depths in order to come out. And so she was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorder, and selective mutism, which is really interesting. In the TED talk, she stated that selective mutism meant she was speaking only when she needed to, and that now is one of those times, now is one of those moments, and that being on the spectrum was an advantage. She felt like as almost everything is black and white in her perception. And so she feels as though she sees things really clearly. And because of the selective mutism, she's only speaking about what's really important or when it really matters to her. And it's a really fascinating phenomenon. And this is really intriguing to me. So this was in August of 2018. She felt as though it reached an overwhelming kind of intensity for her, and she described it as how she couldn't not do the strike. She couldn't not do something about what was happening anymore. She couldn't wait anymore. It was like something had broken. And what was really interesting about this time period is that Mars was in one of its retrograde periods. So it had gone as far as, I think, 6 Aquarius, and moved back to 28 and stationed right at this time, just a few days after she couldn't take it anymore. And Mars activated her voice. At the same time, Uranus is squaring to her natal Mercury. So it's liberating the mind, liberating the voice. And Mars did this really long retrograde period and stationed right on her Mercury, right, as she stands up and can't take it anymore and speaks out, speaks her mind. And, Mercury is conjoining her Jupiter, that's expanding, giving an expansive capacity. And look at this, Jupiter is conjoining her Mars, square to her natal Jupiter. So the good fortune, the more robust sense of courage to take action, to have that kind of like, I'm going to go for it this time. All those things really fit her, at this moment, reaching a limit and then taking action. So this is March 15th of this year, which is actually the same day as the mass shooting in New Zealand. And she had arranged, it's a Friday because her protests are on Friday, they're Friday school climate strikes. And Friday the 15th of 2019 was the largest around the world. And it's interesting because Jupiter had just moved on to her Pluto, like I mentioned before, with ascending in power and coming into one's own power. And the masses, Pluto is the masses, and Jupiter expands that. So you have the more massive protest. It's square to the sun in the sky and Mercury, giving a voice. And Jupiter has also been in part of this square as well. And you see that she also has the Jupiter-Neptune opposition in her natal chart, and that corresponds to a real optimistic utopian idealism often. Like, we can accomplish our highest imaginative goals, like it's that type of orientation towards, don't settle for anything less than the highest ideal. The Jupiter Uranus is more the rebellious, like, emancipator, radical revolutionary, particularly with the T-square to Mars. Like Noam Chomsky is a Mars-Uranus person, radical dissonant. So like, yeah, I felt like those were all really important. They're also, very clearly there's a maturation process taking place. Saturn is crossing her sun. It comes back to 14, I think. So station's just off the sun. Oh, and I didn't mention before, but the Sun Chiron conjunction natally seems to correlate to the possibility, for Asperger's and like the woundedness being part of the quest, where there's a gift in the woundedness that allows for, seeing things black and white and being able to be decisive about it or whatnot in her situation. So yeah, it felt like that was really intriguing. Here's some more images for some of the other protests. She's very into like change the system, not the climate, because she's just like, you just have to stop doing the things that are causing the problem, no matter how difficult those things are. So yeah, this is in San Francisco. I believe this is in England. So yeah, any questions, comments on that? Okay. All right, so let's see. Now, this is Alex Honnold here, and this is El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. And it is a glorious, glorious sight. And let's see, like, what should I say about this? Don't think I mentioned this before. El Capitan was first scaled by human beings, as far as we know, in 1958, and it took 46 days for a group of men to climb this with drills and bolts and ropes, and they were climbing it with lots of gear. And yeah, we'll save that to the end. This is it was a documentary film called Free Solo by National Geographic, and this is Alex scaling the face. So this is his natal chart. He's born August 17th, 1985, with a Mercury-Mars conjunction that's opposite Jupiter. And the Mercury-Mars conjunction is trine to Uranus. And he's born with a tight Sun square Saturn alignment. And wait, is that a question? Come back. Thank you. Okay, so all right, so when I was watching the documentary, and spoiler alerts, I'm gonna describe the movie here. So if you want to leave, I understand. So what was really fascinating when I was watching the film, I remember I did look at his transits back when it happened, but I didn't remember his natal chart or anything. So I was watching the movie, and there were just so many things that began to speak to me as like a strong Saturn energy potentially Sun Saturn is what I was thinking. And there's these types of quotes. He says, I was quiet. I was a quiet, shy child, sorry, and a bit of a dark soul, I think. I guess melancholic is the word. I liked playing with Legos, computer games, and I was too afraid to talk to strangers. So I started doing a lot of soloing, climbing alone. And he said, I really liked it because I could be alone. And in the documentary, they actually do a fMRI, like a live MRI scan with him to see what in his brain is active and not active. And it turns out his amygdala is not very active. In the questionnaire that he was doing prior to that, he says, tend to find faults with others. And he says, agree somewhat. That's like the only one they mentioned as an answer to any question in the documentary. I'm like, oh yeah, find faults with others. The faults is Saturn, and finding faults with others can be Sun Saturn or Mercury Saturn can have like a critical, judgmental quality to it. And the neurologist says, you have no activation in your amygdala. And she was kidding, really, but she says, no, it just needs more stimulation than others because it wasn't lighting up in the same way that the average person's amygdala was lighting up with blood flow. And the amygdala is involved in processing memory, decision-making, and emotional responses, and including fear and anxiety and aggression. So there's very likely something that's happening in his brain that is limiting his the normal capacities or the normal orientations with fear. But it's more than that, because he talks about having to practice to become a good hugger because no one in his family were huggers, and that his father most likely suffered from Asperger's syndrome as well. And his mother said something really interesting in the documentary. She said that, that the family tended to pick on Alex as a child, and Alex didn't actually remember it that way, but his mother did. And it seemed as though maybe, I don't know why, but like maybe they perceived him as a little off or a little goofy or a little different, and, fed into that with their own ideation, which I think is very, very common, factor in many family dynamics. But interestingly, this is a big part. He felt like a loner. He felt like going alone was really important for him to do, to ended up to become a solar climber. And interestingly, he said that his mom would say almost doesn't count. So she was a very goal-oriented, disciplinarian in a sense, and very hard on him in that sense of the Sun Saturn. And I didn't mention this before. His father passed away also when he was a child. I'm not sure, but you often see that with Sun Saturn people is either loss of a parent or a parent who may be emotionally absent or isn't present in the same way as others, and that often there's a need to internalize the authority figure or the authority principle and to take on more responsibility in one's own life relative to the parental dynamics. And that seems to be a big part of his identity growing up. And he talked about how his mom would also say no matter how well he did, it was never good enough. That's the Saturnian judgment of his son. What he did was never good enough, constantly being negated or, criticized, even if one was, doing well. And he said his own quote, he said, I think the free soloing community is a lot like warrior culture, where you give your life to something 100% because your life depends on it. And that is, clearly what free soloing does, is that when they climb these mountains with no supports, no ropes, no safety measures, it is a life or death situation, and you have to be in the zone, on point all the time, or else, you very well might not make it. So what happened was in the filming of the movie, he wanted to scale out Capitan. They have movie filmographers there who are scaling the mountain with him on different days that he thinks he might want to actually attempt to do it without ropes. And it goes on for probably a year and a half or so. And then he wants to do it in the fall of 2016, and he falls twice for the first time really ever in his life. He falls and has a compact fracture in his spine. And then I don't know how much longer later, but he falls again and sprains his ankle. And so you often see with Saturn Uranus hard aspects is the sudden unexpected Uranus mishap Saturn, that unexpected fall, or the sense of like feeling as though one's structures are kind of suddenly taken away from one, or the sudden unexpected accident, that type of thing. So this was happening in the summer and fall of 2016, and he ends up not attempting it. He attempts, he goes like, I don't know, a quarter of the way up, and then he just gets cold feet and decides not to do it. And he waits until the spring of next year to go back to Yosemite and to prep and to work on his practice. And look at what took place during that time. Saturn moved from the conjunction to Uranus into the conjunction with Neptune, but in a trine with the sun at the same time that Uranus was moving into a trine with the sun. So he's getting this Saturn trine Uranus energy in the sky in a grand trine to his sun. And what he does is, extra practice. And this is when they scale any important cliff face, they actually have done it several times with ropes, and they've marked down, he particularly marked down every step. So like he knew where his hand was going to go and his foot was going to go, and every place all the way up and across the face of the mountain. So it's an incredibly engineering feat. That's the Saturn Uranus energy. Uranus is the novelty, the genius, the pattern recognition for the new step, the best step, and Saturn is the organization and the structure and the path and the planning and the rigorous kind of dedication that it took to, and the detail Saturn to bring this event to pass. So on the day of June 3rd, 2017, he became the first person to free solo El Capitan. It took him only 3 hours and 56 minutes. And afterward, he said, "I don't know, the mountain just didn't seem that scary to me this morning. I didn't compromise on anything that I wanted to do. It feels good." So like, look at these transits. So not only did he have Saturn in the grand trine with Uranus and Venus on that day to the sun, but he also had Jupiter in a grand trine with his natal Jupiter and the sun in the sky and the moon. And Mars in the sky was in a trine to his natal Pluto. So like the intense energy, the focus to, a lot of long distance runners and stuff have Mars Pluto. And like to have two grand trines on the important parts of your chart, Sun and Jupiter, at the moment that you make the most celebratory event of your life. I mean, he instantly became famous. Uranus trine the sun, liberating, awakening his identity to the world. And and a dream come true. He had been dreaming about it, Neptune, the dreams, for many years. And Saturn, comes into the conjunction, and the disciplined, focused, hard work that it took years and years of labor to accomplish, to have the dream come true, also fits a positive Saturn-Neptune alignment, where all the work and labor went into the dream, and then the dream was accomplished. So there's a couple of more images. This is Alex on a face. He carries, I don't know if it's like talcum powder or some type of chalk that they put on their fingers so he can grip more easily. But this is him. This is on the Yosemite face, Capitan face. And this image I'm struck by because of how incredible it is. This is, I forget what it's called, but it's a single crack along this face, and you're basically holding resistance with your weight against the feet, and that's it. It's just how hard you're pulling here versus how hard you're standing on this side. And you just you know, every footstep and all the way up. So quite an amazing feat, and very fitting of both, you know, the Mars Jupiter I'd even mentioned his natal chart. You know, that's the conquistador energy to climb of the quest, Mars on the mountain, you know, on the highest peak, like going for the ascent constantly. Yeah, there's that's the last image. So let's see, wait, whoops, how are we doing on time? Oh yeah, lots of time. So how's everybody doing out there? Great. So, you know, so does anyone have any comments or questions or anything you want me to unpack a little more? Or, yeah, I kind of went through it a little fast. Okay. Yeah, like yeah, we can wind down, or I could flip over to Solar Fire and just look at charts if we wanted. But, yeah, maybe it's best we just wrap up.
I have a question.
Please.
Since we're at the end of the Saturn-Pluto cycle, is there an intensification of the events relating to both of the archetypes when you're coming to the end of that, you know, end of the cycle?
That's a good question. Like, I would say that it basically operates like a bell curve, and there's not, let me control this. Honestly, it depends a lot on how we negotiate the transit, meaning like how it's worked with, how the energies are worked with throughout the cycle, throughout the time period of it itself. Like both the financial crisis in 2008 and the financial crisis and the Great Depression, they both came in early. Like when the orb of influence is like 10 or 12 degrees out, it came in early, and then the manifestation took on later. In personal transits, I've seen it work both ways. I've seen it come in early in personal transits, but I've also seen the manifestation of, or like a major event happen later in the transit. And in those situations, in personal biographies, they've been more where it seems as though the person is avoiding working with the energy, or resisting it or putting it off, and then it comes in with more intensity towards the end, in a sense, because it hasn't been negotiated adequately throughout the duration of the transit. I would say that this situation, we're actually just at the more in the beginning side of the Saturn-Pluto. Here, let me, actually, this will make it easier. Let me do this. If we go to a chart with 0 Aries, there we go. So it'll stay fixed here. So let me go to now. So like the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, Saturn just moved to within 3 degrees, and I'll be moving here in months. And you were both retrograding back. Saturn goes back to 14 here in stations, starts to move forward again. And they become exact in early 2020. This is right around inauguration. And then Saturn moves into Aquarius, stations at 1 there, comes back to 25. Yep, 25 stations in October of 2020. And then, sorry, I was a year ahead, not inauguration. And then I would say the Saturn-Pluto conjunction ends roughly in November of 2021. That's the last, I mean, this is about 15 degrees or so, 12, 13. So it's right near the end of 15 to 20 degree orbs, especially for the conjunction, because it's the beginning and the end of a cycle. So I think we still have a lot good ways to go with this. I think we're going to see a lot more political restructuring between all the different nations that are in these conservative kind of consolidation time periods. How the trade war and stuff works out with China, going forward. I mean, China is clearly like the rising power, and how, their economy will surpass ours in the next 30 years or something. I mean, there's inevitability to this, shifts and transitions, but it seems as though here in the United States, we're really facing our shadow in ways that, first in my lifetime to experience it like this. And there's just been a lot of repression about who we are. And it seems as though Trump has kind of sanctioned it. He's given voice and allowed it to come to the surface in ways that it was just buried before. And I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I was thinking of that because being born during the opposition of Saturn-Pluto, it seems like at that point, it was becoming, it was to the point where it could no longer be denied. And to me, the opposition holds the Libra energy, and Libra doesn't necessarily want to face what doesn't look pretty, and take action to, they're just kind of hoping that it'll just go away somehow. Right. And because we haven't really, kind of dealt with it, because of course the energies have waned since then, and now that we're hitting that closing period, it feels like that constant, every time, you want to try to bury your head in the sand, it's like, Pluto takes the shovel and it's digging that sand out. Right. You try to go deeper and it goes deeper at the same time, pulling that sand out. Yes. So that's why I was asking, as far as cycles, once it hits that closing period, does it seem to be an intensification?
I see. I understand your question now. Yes, I do think that it seems as though, large forces that began at the beginning of in the 80 to 84 period are coming to fruition, or a close in many ways. Like I would say, like the terrorist situation, because there's a cyclical relationship to the first terrorist attacks in 83, and then the first World Trade Center bombing in 93, 9/11 in 2001, and then Syria and the crisis that's manifesting out of that through 2012 up till now. It seems as though there's potentially a shift or a rebalancing of power that's going to take place, where hopefully a new worldview can come into place surrounding the Middle East in this cycle that we're in. I don't know. I honestly, I can't see the future on that very easily right now. But I think, to me, maybe the biggest world power shift is going to be with China, and it's since the early '80s, around that time period. That's when the whole credit system was really took off. Like I think credit cards first really came in the late '70s, and then the debt and the way that the United States has run its economy since then has been on debt. And a large part of our debt is owned by China. So there seems to be a way in which we've kind of given our power away in a lot of ways. We've become more powerful, but we've also indebted ourselves, and those things are going to have to reach some type of resolution. I mean, I'm really typically very critical of Trump and stuff, and I was critical of the trade war in the very beginning. And but from what I understand, I guess it does seem like China has been taking advantage. And I don't know. I'm not a capitalist. I hate capitalism, but maybe that's part of it too. We have this giant socialist movement that's taking place here, and honestly, the way I see that is because there's an intuition amongst young people that just recognize that capitalism isn't sustainable and it's not working for the 99%, and there's a real impulse to embrace socialism because capitalism is seen as genuinely not functioning correctly or sustainably in a worthwhile way where it's making people happy. So we may be in the midst of much more giant shifts than we can even realize. But the other thing is that a lot of the economic things that were put into place during the 2008 to 2012 financial crisis, my understanding, they're just paper but band-aids. They're not structural changes. So we made fewer banks that are too bigger to fail. So it didn't actually sew up the system in a structural way, or a really deeply structural way. It just kind of paper structured it up top. It's from my understanding. So we may be in for a full another recession and stuff soon. So honestly, I don't know, but definitely feels like an ending of things and the beginning of something new. And honestly, I'm happy that a large part of the shadow is being revealed in the United States, and so hopefully we can move forward in ways that allow everything to be more balanced and more on the up and up, more transparent, because so much of what United States power and the way we've been trying to manipulate the world has been hidden, especially from the United States. Like a big part of what's happening with the migrant crisis right now and coming out of Central America, it's due to the Nicaragua and wars that Reagan did there, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras. We destabilized those countries, and because we didn't want them to flourish in the 80s and stuff. And this is a more backflow from our own corrupt, manipulative, empirical desires. So yeah, hope that's helpful. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? Well, bye.